Radujem se današnjem razgovoru sa Vladimirom Dlouhijem, predsednikom Evrokomore, organizacije koja okuplja 20 miliona biznisa iz 40 zemalja. Vladimir Dlouhi bio je ministar privrede i potpredsednik vlade Češke. Da li je evropska privreda konkurentna? Da li možemo da se nosimo sa igračima poput Sjedinjenih Američkih Država i Kine? Šta su najveći izazovi pred kojima evropska privreda stoji? Kakva je uloga Srbije u svemu tome? Kako će izgledati pozicija Zapadnog Balkana kada je u pitanju evropska privredna arhitektura? O svemu ovome razgovaramo sa Vladimirom Dlouhijem, predsednikom Evropske komore. Vladimir, thank you a lot for your time, and thank a lot that I have a chance to exchange some ideas and some thoughts with you as somebody who is a little bit younger and with somebody who is really experienced, not only experienced, but witnessed a lot in the European very rich history in the last decades. And let's start with one mind game. So, having in mind your great journey, I think from Velvet Revolution, transformation in Czechoslovakia, then Czech Republic, your political career, your business career, if Europe would be a company, let's say like this, and of course your commitment to econometrics, if Europe would be a company, what kind of company would it be, and would you invest your money in it?
Well, this is a very interesting start of the discussion. Thanks for inviting me, Marco. Well, if Europe was a company, I'm afraid it would be bankrupt today. First. Second, if I had money to invest, I wouldn't invest in a company called Europe today. But having said these two rather harsh points, on the other hand, today when Donald Trump has been elected for the second time as the US president. Today, when in my country, a billionaire businessman called Andrej Babiš has a big chance to become prime minister again next year. And when many business people are entering politics, I'm always saying that we cannot compare country, state, even the management of a country. We cannot and should not compare it with a company or a corporation. I know this is not a very popular view. Many people now feel that traditional politicians didn't fulfill their expectations, and they are inclined more and more to believe that people like Elon Musk can make the administration more efficient. I have big question marks. Maybe they will, but I have a big question mark because politics cannot be only about deal making. While corporations are about the deal making and making money, making profit, being competitive. While a good politician must have some long-term strategy, which sometimes might be against the short-term deals.
I understand, but it is a mind thought, it's not a reality. Let's just stay in the...
Let's play with it. Yeah.
Let's try to stay in the same metaphor. There are three companies, large companies. One is USA, one is China, one is Europe. And as you said, it's not so that we are really competitive a lot as a European continent and a European economy. What has to be done to be investable again? If we compare these three, let's say companies, but let's say three big, large players.
Well, I can speak only for Europe. I will not speak for China or for the United States. As a matter of fact, these quotation companies are doing better than the company called Europe. And I would like to remind that there are more companies in today's world. One such a company is called India, or we can call companies Southeast Asia, even Latin America, Middle East. All these are either the countries or groupings of the countries which have their own specific approach to the ideology behind their state, organizing the politics. Some are not democratic at all, but they are economically flourishing. Middle East, China. Yeah. At least China made, despite the current problems, made a huge progress over past 30 years. So there are, quotation, more companies. Speaking about Europe, if I can afford a little bit more wider look, I think that we should admit that the European problems with today's lacking behind in productivity, competitiveness, and also growth and improvement of the welfare is rooted in much earlier period than we believe. Now everybody speaks about the Draghi's report. Yes, the analytical part of Draghi's report is very good, probably the best what has been written. With the recommendations, there are already many question marks, but everybody tends to see it through the optic of today. But remember, even before the year 2000, which is already a quarter of a century ago, there was a preparation of the so-called Lisbon strategy, which says in 2000 that in 2010, Europe is going to be the most productive, competitive, fastest growing area in the world, which, by the way, did not happen, unfortunately. But also it reflects the fact that those who were preparing the Lisbon strategy at the end of 90s, they already must have perceived some internal European, inherent European problems. And this has to do that after the miraculous growth after Second World War during the 50s and the 60s, there emerged some type of the European model, which was very much based on the welfare model of the European society, with the roles of trade unions, with the roles of the NGOs, with a very strong social agenda, which, let's say, given the experience of the Great Depression in the 30s and ensuing Second World War, it was understandable, but already that overall European model a little bit undermined the position of Europe vis-à-vis United States, and of course later vis-à-vis China after the Chinese first market-oriented reforms and the restart of the Chinese growth. And that, then I believe it has been exaggerated by the subsequent policies of the European Commission, but also of some national governments, where I am unfortunately very critical. I believe that we were shooting ourselves in our own legs with over-regulating our businesses, with, let's say, let me take the climate policies. I'm not against climate policies. Looking outside the windows, you see that something got substantially changed and we should do something. But the Americans are fighting the climate change with the investment. We're fighting it with the regulation. We first regulate, then we observe the consequences, which are negative, then we try to subsidize and help.
Put some money in. Yeah.
Put some money in. But we didn't create an environment which would properly not only help something to do with the climate, but which would also transform this effort to the business and economic part of our life, to generate new businesses, new startups, really to improve the green technology, not only development, but production in Europe. It has to do with many, many things. For the current period, is well described in the analytical part of the Draghi's report, so we could discuss it out nauseam. But it is here, and it is the biggest European problem for the moment.
Yeah, and speaking about the time that we are now in, and we are, I think in this week's we will also celebrate 35 years of Velvet Revolution in Prague, and you were part of it. And at that time, I think Europe, or let's say Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and of course the whole continent was in the middle of geopolitical turmoil. And it was actually, everything happens there. And it was, and you also said, somewhere in your interview, I read that you got enlightened in Belgium when you're being in Belgium, as in your studying years, about, questioning the traditional principles of socialistic times and socialistic economies and so on. Yes, we are now in Belgium again, and you are having your position here. And comparing with the 35 years ago, are we in some kind of momentum where we need to really face the challenges in the way that are much more radical than we are trying to do it with analysis? And we have all the analysis, we have all the data, but I do not see some kind of really, let's say, facing the truth, facing the reality in the way that we need to change something. And if you see, you also mentioned about Green Deal. I think that we are on the verge that Europe lags behind in a lot of innovations, in a lot of investments in new, let's say, technologies. But one of them is, for example, in energy, where Europe is much, much faster and better, for example, in researching the nuclear fusion and nuclear energy for a proposition of getting or gathering the electricity. But I don't see the readiness that the politics really wants to apply this research. So are we actually, are we losing the momentum? Because there are two big revolutions at the moment. One is technological and one is the geopolitical. The world is changing on both levels. With geopolitics, you know how to deal with, mostly, because we had some turmoils in the past. The technology is something that I don't think that we are actually, facing it right. It's really something that Europe has to deal with in a better way.
Well, these are a couple of questions. Let me start, if I may, with going back to the beginning of 90s to the transformations in Central Europe. The part of the transformation was, of course, the willingness or readiness of the countries to become the member of the West European post-war integration development, which entry into the EU, which in the case of Czech Republic and other countries was in 2004. When I was not in the politics anymore, but I was part of the government who started to prepare it. As a matter of fact, I was part of the government which applied for the membership in the EU in 1995.
But the entrance is only an entrance, but everything was done before.
Yeah, but here is one problem which I personally perceive. That time, for me, European Union was defined by few characteristics. Parliamentary democracy, human rights and freedom of speech, political democracy, market economy, maybe with a different emphasis as to the social component, social component, and of course the private ownership, because communist countries were fully nationalized, we had to privatize the businesses, etc., etc., etc. Today, after 20 years or 25 years, already back in, let's say, 2015, 10 years ago, I had a feeling that the younger generation of especially West European electorate and also substantial part of the political spectrum consider this definition of Europe to be something either we don't have to talk about it anymore or it's given. And they started to define Europe on something which today is called ESG. Europe is defined by being most aggressive in fighting the climate change. Europe is defined also in that social and governance part, the right of the minorities, the pressure on the businesses to behave in a certain way, both ecologically and socially minded, etc. And for me, let me finish it. For me, it seemed to me to be like a completely new definition of Europe, and I'm not pretty sure whether people in Central Europe, or maybe even a silent majority in Western Europe, whether they accept such an aggressive new definition of Europe, to the extent that even some of the original principles, like free speech, sometimes I am, sorry to say so, I feel as if being a little bit suppressed. This is now changing. We are talking in December 2024. But 3-4 years ago, and today you see it on, let's say, some of the universities, not speaking about the US, when you say something against the current Green Deal, you are considered as, this is considered as something which should not be said. And that's very wrong. So my first problem is that I see that Europe is not defined only on those very principles we wanted to join after the end of communism, that Europe is now defined in a certainly different way. And that I feel is a problem.
Have we lost actually our sense for core business? Getting back to the company.
If I should use the corporate dictionary or vocabulary, maybe that's nice. And now coming back to your other questions, you know, I very much agree that in Europe we have a first-class people. We have excellent research, we have excellent academicians, scientists, we have excellent young entrepreneurs. But we should pose a question, why then we are not able to transform it into much higher value added and into much higher competitiveness? Why startups in Europe, very often when they reach a certain level of development, they prefer to move to the United States? Why there is even talk about deindustrialization? In America, you don't see it. Of course, there is a certain part of the U.S. society which votes for Donald Trump because they lost the jobs which went to China or elsewhere. But they don't talk so much about deindustrialization. So why it is the case? And here I come back because of our emphasis on that post-Second World War welfare model, our social setup, now newly combined with the Green Deal and ESG regulation. We over-regulated. We put a straitjacket to our businesses, and they are not able to develop as quickly. And here, the last comment, it's not only the guilt of the European Commission, as some people of that Brussels. Of course, it's Brussels because it reflects that new definition of Europe, but very often it's due to the national governments with the famous gold plating, etc. So I'm saying that on one side, much less Europe, deregulate, and the question is how. That's a big question, but okay. But I would, for instance, say that if we deregulate, if we improve the conditions for businesses on one side, then I would be, on the other side, ready to accept more Europe in two areas from the business point of view. Deeper single market and capital market union. Because one of the reasons why the startups leave from Europe to the United States is that they can find a more efficient and more useful way of financing of their businesses than in Europe. It is to do that in Europe there is a tradition to use mostly the standard banking financing of the development, while the capital market is by far not as deep as in the United States. And also today, if you look at the markets in Shanghai and in Hong Kong, in Asia.
I spent some time, and you were also traveling a lot like last week, also in China and the US. And I haven't seen it, and yes, these days I spend some time in the European Parliament talking with parliamentarians. And I haven't seen a continent, or let's say a group of, or entity, which is so disconnected from their own business.
You said that.
Yeah,
I sometimes criticize. I agree. I agree very much.
Something that you have just to go to the parliament to talk with people.
Here, Marco, again, let's talk freely. I like the unrestrained talks, but here, frankly, I must be careful. I'm president of Eurochamber, which is the representative of the chambers of commerce of 38 countries. It's not only the countries who are members of the EU, but like Serbia and many others. But I am supposed to have a good relations with for instance, the new commission which starts to work. I must be careful when I'm saying these people are detached from the reality, but I'm afraid sometimes when I speak to the top representatives of a commission, but also to the administration of the commission. Here in Brussels, there are thousands of people. Most of them are very well educated. They are young. They have 1 or 2 universities. They are experts in their particular field. But in reality, they seem to be detached really from the everyday problems of many people.
But that don't mean it's a personal issue, it's a structural issue.
It's structural, and that brings me, of course, to the question what to do with it and how to be able to realize, for instance, the recommendations of the Draghi's report. And here I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I believe that, for instance, deregulation will not be like that the next commission will deregulate. No, it will have to be the process which will start with the immediate stop of issuing the new regulations, to let part of today's regulatory framework to die out over a certain period of time, to reconsider the Green Deal, the targets, the speed. Not to reconsider the need for the climate change policies. We need them,
the idea,
but the overall approach. To reconsider the overall ESG, to reconsider the relations between the Commission and the national governments. The national governments must be prepared for much less gold plating. To reconsider all the decision-making process on the level of the top 27 countries. So this will be the process which will last not one period of 5 years. It will last for a decade or 2, but we must start to do it, otherwise we will definitely lose the connection to the more developed areas globally.
But when I see also your activities in last months, and also considering the Western Balkans and our, let's say, role or future relations to the EU, you always supported also as the Euro Chambers, but I think also as you know, for businessman and man who knows a lot about economy, that there has to be a way how to integrate the Western Balkans into the European economic structure, which is not only you are a member or not a member, because membership will come, it takes time, it is of course on the both sides needs to be done the homeworks to be able of the European Union to get the new members, and of course of the countries not to get too soon or unready to some processes that are expecting in the EU. But there are other ways. We cannot live in the 90s in the 2024. So there are ways, and the Euro Chamber supported us on this level to say, okay, there is a possibility to make some kind of single market entry, stage by step entry, and it would somehow close the gap, because now I don't think that there is a lot of awareness that, you know, Western Balkan and the part of Europe, which is very central in Europe, could become a security problem for the European Union. It is, you know, nobody sleeps from the other players, yeah? And we are too small as countries in the Western Balkans to fight with that. And you know, I know that you also you went in last period of time and visited some countries in the Western Balkans. What is your, you know, experience, or what is your impression about, let's say, also the energy there, people there, and of course, how do you see it in the relation with the EU?
Well, Eurochamber is a representative of business. I should be apolitical. As a president of Eurochamber, I must suppress, for instance, my personal views. So when I am traveling to such an area like Western Balkans, but I was, for instance, last year in Georgia, or I was in June in Central Asia, always as a Eurochamber representative. I do not usually comment the political situation. I do not comment how, for instance, politically Serbia is perceived as a maneuvering between Russia and the EU. I cannot comment on Serbia-Kosovo relations. I cannot comment on internal Bosnia-Herzegovina tensions, etc., etc. But I know one thing, that we need to develop business relations. We all know, and you mentioned it, that strategically Western Balkan still contains the higher risks than some other parts in Europe. I mean security risk. And the best way how institution like Eurochamber and its president can contribute to diminish those risks and open the involvement of Western Balkan countries, if not exactly in the EU, so in a much deeper cooperation with EU, with the single market approach, etc., is to help to establish much deeper business relations. And I represent mainly the small and medium-scale enterprises, and that's the, I would say, bread and butter. That's the core of the businesses in many of your countries. So I was in Montenegro. I spoke a lot with people from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This time I was in Kosovo. I was in Albania. The fact that I, on this particular trip, was not in Serbia does not mean anything. You know very well that I'm coming to Serbia very often, and I plan to be in January probably in Belgrade again. So this is how I see my role, or the role of Eurochamber. When you are our members, we should do our utmost to help you to deepen your mutual business relations in Western Balkans, and to deepen your relations with the EU and with the single markets. Of course, understanding that there are some political facts which must be sorted out, but that this is not an issue I'm entitled to comment.
Let's say 20 years from now, what would you like for your grandchildren? What kind of Europe should they inherit?
That I would love to see it, but I will be in 20 years 91, so it's a big question mark. Then I am speaking about grandchildren in a little bit peculiar situation. I have two grandsons. One is 19 and one is 1.
Oh,
so
that
there is
really
a huge
combination.
So the one who is 19 in, let's say, 20 years will be 40. Yeah. He will be in his best professional and hopefully also personal period. Well, for him, I hope that this is going to be already a different Europe, where some of those processes which I mentioned, which we discussed, which I said will not be changed like that, but will require, let's say, 1 or 2 decades. So I wish for my grandson, who's gonna be 40 that time, that indeed already Europe is less regulated, deepened in cooperation in certain areas like the capital markets, but freed from the, or liberated from the unnecessary, not only regulation, but the management which did not help the development of productivity and competitiveness in the past. In other words, I would like to see the progress in all those areas we discuss as problematic. And the one who is 1 year old, so he gonna be 20, 21 at the beginning of the adult period. Maybe, of course, it's valid what I'm going to say also for the first one. For him, I would wish peace, because we know that we are, we didn't discuss that, but globally we are now in a situation when Europe, as a matter of fact, is in war, despite the fact that fortunately on our territories there are no fightings, but we are basically in war, like it or not. People are afraid of it. There are many global tensions, not only between US and China, but elsewhere. So for the young one, for the small one, I would like to wish peace in the first place. Because after all, European integration, if we go back to the founding fathers, it was a reaction to the 3 tragic wars stemming from the Franco-German animosity, 1870, 1914, and 1939. Yeah. And these 3 wars then led to the fact that Europe should start to integrate, cooperate, to avoid the future conflicts. And here, unfortunately, we seem now to be at the end of a certain road when we are facing the danger of the next conflicts.
you finally made a great connection between getting all the things done what you expressed that needed to be done for your oldest grandchild. And if this succeeds, then we can talk about that we are in the core business again.
Yeah, then we will be in the core.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting you.
Članak koji sam nedavno pročitao u Harvard Business Review inspirisao me da kupim, pročitam knjigu, zaista neverovatno delo dvojice autora, Paula Dohertyja i Jamesa Wilsona. Napisali su knjigu Human plus Machine ili Ljudi plus mašine. Ova knjiga bavi se upravo prostorom saradnje između ljudi i novih tehnologija, pre svega baziranih na veštačkoj inteligenciji. Ono što je posebno zanimljivo, ova knjiga nije samo pregled najnovijih tehnoloških dešavanja, ona je čak dopunjeno i prošireno izdanje. Koliko brzo napreduje tehnologija, toliko ova dva autora moraju da dopunjuju i svoje izdanja i svoje knjige. Dakle, veoma preporučujem svima onima koji danas rade, posluju, vode preduzeća, imaju male biznise, jer upravo ovo delo govori o prostoru koje će u budućnosti biti jako važno, a to je prostor saradnje ljudske kreativnosti i veštačke inteligencije. Dakle, ne samo šta sve može veštačka inteligencija. I ono što mi posebno bilo zanimljivo jeste da otvara jedan optimistički prostor. Uvek govorimo o tome kako će veštačka inteligencija zameniti ljude. Ova knjiga upravo govori o prostoru koji je neizbežan, a to je da ljudi i mašine rade zajedno. Dakle, na koji način ćemo mi morati da proizvedemo novi način mišljenja o tome kako radimo i kako mislimo i kako poslujemo. Dakle, preporučujem Human and Machine. Razmislite i vi kako veštačka inteligencija i nove tehnologije mogu da doprinesu vašem poslovanju. Ova knjiga će mi tekako pomoći. A do sledeće nedelje ostanite radoznali.